Because what I've learned is that, we had the state law change relatively in the recent past. 2 years, I'll say 2 years, just to say 2 years, or 3. Is it now 3? Oh gosh, time flies when you're having fun here. But so it's been a relatively recent change. We've had a number of different comments, like the one that Trustee Carpenter mentioned about taking pictures of things. How are we going about doing it? What's the most, and I'll say it more quietly, but, I'm a fan of prioritizing. Because it allows us to see what prioritizing. It allows the staff to get some direction in terms of
duties.
Yeah, some duties in terms. Well, there are a number of different things that we do code enforcement on. Correct? I mean, since I've learned through the department, and it would be helpful to have that in a prioritized level. I think from the board's perspective and the staff's perspective, it would be most beneficial to have someone who is contracted for inspections, with the inspection also doing a level of enforcement. I'm not sure where those percentages fall out. The reason why I'm suggesting that is because if you do, as Trustee Maher suggested, have a larger project come online, like a new mosaic or a new oaks or a new something else, you're going to need some additional assistance and flexibility. So at some times during the year, you may have a higher percentage of code enforcement in the position. At some areas, you may have a lower, just because it's based on fluctuating demand. And it provides you with greater flexibility and more of an opportunity to lean into what are our prioritizations for enforcement, or, if you're given the choices at these different points in your
Are you talking about option D where you would have contract out?
C for reduced enforcement, but knowing that it may not be 50%, it may be 80%, and 20%. And then we may have other development come online. And then we're gonna have to assess, well, what is that? I always want to put us as an organization in a position of maximum flexibility. And with Shorewood, we know we're defined by our boundaries, we're not a developing community. But we do hope to have some other projects that we work on that are larger in nature. And I've seen the amount of effort that Justin's been putting in. Justin's one of our building inspector on the O's. He's there constantly, every day. It's a big drain on resources, but having someone in-house to back up sometimes may be beneficial.
Can I just, one clarifying question? So you mentioned contracting, and then you mentioned maybe less, we don't know the percentage of code enforcement. So that would be, I think, option D. I just want clarity, because it would be our current staff that we have just switching around duties, and then maybe having to, if demand gets high for, is that what you're saying? You might need to bring people. You're saying don't hire that half-time position for in-house.
If the board made the decision to move from 5 FTEs to 4 FTEs,
yes.
And if you contracted for additional services, that would be for building inspection services.
Okay.
And that would give you flexibility to, based upon project load, to assess how much code enforcement you have during a period of time or not. And it would also allow you the flexibility to change to meet your demand. Potentially.
Thank you.
Under the policy direction.
Thank you for giving your, thank you. Does anybody else have any discussion? We do have a motion and a second. Trustee Bockhorst?
What is the motion again?
Did you have that?
Trustee Amento moved to reduce a full-time equivalent for code compliance to half a person, and for the planning director to return the staffing options with a half of position for code compliance.
Okay, I do have a discussion point then. Rebecca is right. When the governor got rid of the code compliance requirement for the sale of homes in the state of Wisconsin, we lost that ability as a municipality to ensure that people selling their homes, or that people kept their homes up to date. There were other things that we lost in that as well, but I am wondering, and I'm asking you guys, my fellow trustees, this honestly, why we as trustees feel that we're better qualified to tell the planning department which position they should cut if they were to cut a position to half-time than them making the decision themselves. So, I mean, I hear you're saying like option D, E,
Can we
whatever.
ask them? that would be helpful, just, so in other words, if you were gonna do a half, what would be your preference if we were gonna reduce something in those two positions, I guess?
Can I clarify the motion before I answer that question?
Yeah.
So my understanding of the motion is to cut code enforcement to a half-time position, but then maintain 2 building inspection full-time in some level, either contract or a hire and a half person. So maybe 4.5 full-time equivalents under the current motion. Is that correct? Or is it
Trustee Menta?
4?
I think it's either, but trustee Menta, do you know?
I understood it to return the staffing option, but to include the halftime code compliance.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, to
I
maintain
just
code
I
compliance.
just wanted to get
Sorry.
direction to reduce code compliance and then,
And then between 4 or 4.5?
yeah, between 4 or 4.5.
Because that's the question I just heard as to,
Right.
I feel as though inspection services can be contracted out easier, especially when you're busy or not busy. What's going to be more difficult, and I'm not saying we can't do it, but I just want to be clear, what's going to be more difficult is understanding whose priorities and enforcement are enforceable, this month versus this week versus 6 months from now, because
I see what you're
it
saying.
will be an education level for staff, for neighbors, for everyone, to say, oh, but in March it was okay, and now in October it's not okay. So reducing that clarity of that position to be
I see
more
what you're saying.
flexible is more difficult, whereas an inspector, you have an inspection to perform, and you would say, yeah, we need you to come over to so-and-so at so-and-so time. So I've always been clear, I hope, in option 3 with the reduction, a large effort will need to be made on education, both internally and externally to residents and everything in between. Because I don't want to be in the position as the director every day to be saying, yep, I think that one's worth enforcing. No, it's not, because I have plenty of other things.
You want the
As a
flexibility.
planning director that I'd like to be planning and doing. And if my job becomes a review or a micromanagement of what's enforceable, that's much more difficult for me. And that's just my opinion. I think I was asked for it, so I presented it.
Thank you so much. And trustee Menta, then I do have a comment
I
on it.
mean, I think that my presumption is that you would go to more of a complaint-based model, and just sort of wandering around the village looking for enforcement issues. Like first you would deal with someone if someone complained, and then if there was time after that, you could drive around and,
It's
That's
reducing the
definitely an
service.
option.
I'm sorry, but
No.
catch people who have broken windows or whatever it is. But-
I'm saying and I agree that's definitely an option, but I feel like I need to have that clarity so that I know what is being chosen and all that,
Well, but you're implying that someone is gonna call and complain. Well, that's a complaint. You're saying that the residents are gonna be, well, if a resident, then that's a complaint. Then you can deal with that resident. I'm saying that the inspection that's not based on resident complaints is an area that could be, I wouldn't even say reduced, I would say more reasonably provided.
So I think you're saying the same thing, and Rebecca will tie you in too. Everybody, the intent is to have a reduced level of code enforcement. The concern is from the two administrators that if it's 60%, if it's, like that management on the day-to-day level. So, so is what you both have said, if I'm paraphrasing this correctly, the intent is to meet trustee Amenta's motion to reduce code enforcement without giving a specific percentage, like to 50%, like let you come back and say, what Rebecca just basically said is to have the flexibility, we can contract out inspections easier, but you understand that the intent was to have a reduced level of enforcement, not necessarily inspections.
And I'll say the hourly rate and the percentage, I agree, will and can fluctuate based on, time of year. What would be more clear to me would be a defined, these are the things that we want to prioritize, roofs, yards, garages, et
Which we'll
cetera.
get to, but usually a budget is also a policy decision. I just want to, so you don't necessarily have to define that all. It's basically a direction from your legislators. The budget is a policy. It's defined in every standard textbook that way. And so by the board voting, if that was the will of the board, to reduce, then you go and you do the exercise that I think Rebecca has presented, which is, okay, what did you mean by that? Let's figure it out as a team. You could flip it and do the let's figure it out as a team and then get it, but unfortunately, either way, you're gonna do the same exercise, it's just that we have a budget coming up. So if it was in January that this happened, that conversation could happen. You know what I mean? I don't know that it makes a difference one way or the other. That's just personally from my experience, but Trustee Warren.
Yeah, I'm just thinking this through, and you know, for me, it's about, you know, to be blunt, you know, when staff recommends something, you guys are the experts, you guys know what you're doing, and I always want to give as much deference as I can to that recommendation. Here, we're dealing with a tough budget for next budget cycle. So a lot of this is controlled by, you know, where can we find ways to save dollars. All that being said, that's why I think this is more appropriate in a budgetary discussion. I think this needs to be something that we look at in conjunction with the bigger picture. That's not to say that I support, you know, having a full-time position there, a full-time FTE, but I think it needs to be weighed amongst other priorities within the context of the budget discussion. Because again, I very much appreciate your recommendations. I think you're the expert, and I think there's a level of deference there, but still, I think we need to look at it in terms of the bigger picture as well.
And I also think that we also hear from the residents, so we do have some, I mean, we're here for a reason, otherwise the administration could just put the budget together. So it is a policy decision on the level of service based on your overall service level of your village, and what do you think based on your resident input. That's what we're here for, is to make a policy choice. And so I don't think anyone's wrong. I so appreciate staff, thank you so much. Your time is way appreciated. I know you're working really hard on this, and thank you to the staff, as Rebecca said, for filling in. I mean, without additional compensation, I mean, that's laudable. And now it's our time that we have to make the hard decisions, and we've had input as well. Trustee McKay?
I think what I'm hearing is that it's almost like there are complaints about our enforcement, not complaints about properties. And so it sounds like we would need to have this discussion about enforcement, whether we have the money for, you know, all the full-time and even adding one, you know. So it sounds like the board is split, or maybe even majority, in terms of pulling back on enforcement. And that is a decision, that's a discussion that we're going to need to have, so that staff really does have clear direction and they're not dealing with, you know, they say no to something and then somebody goes around them and then we're telling them, hey, what are you doing? You know, we've got to get that taken care of, I think. And that is just separate. So I would call the question for tonight, as far as it looks like what the motion is on the table, whether we want to reduce a half-time to have 4.5 FTEs in the department versus 5 FTEs. And that's essentially the motion on the table.
It's 4 or
It's to
4.5
reduce the code compliance.
to half, and then how
Yes.
much do we want to add back with a contractor?
It's not budgetary. It's
Right, I feel like then we're trying to address something that, you know, and the board can do that if they want. I think we should call the question, to be honest.
That's okay, she asked to call the question. Do we need a second on that? If not, second, okay. We will vote on whether we want further discussion or if we want to go straight to the motion on the table. All those in favor of calling the question, say aye.
Aye.
Was it?
I'm nay, because I heard Trustee Warren wanted to say something.
Sorry. Okay, and all those
We
opposed?
don't have discussion on calling to question.
No.
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 Goes that discussion about the
I'm sorry, I was just
This is what it's 155-17 in the village code. It says, any member desirous of terminating the debate may call the previous question. Then the question announced by the president shall the main question be put. If the majority of the members vote in the affirmative, then the question shall be taken without further debate. Its effect shall be put to an end.
I don't even think you need a second,
So
correct?
it's handled properly.
Thank you. Okay, so all those opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Nay. Further discussion. Trustee Warren.
I was just trying to clarify what the actual motion is, because I'm, at this point, I've lost it a little bit.
Okay,
so I just wanna
okay,
make sure that I'm
let's go
following.
back.
I clearly had lost it.
Yes, okay, thank you for that clarity. Can you read it again, and then maybe trustee Amenta, who is the motion maker, can
Yeah.
clarify? Okay.
I have reduced a full-time equivalent for code compliance to half a
See, we don't do
position.
code compliance anymore, it's code enforcement, I believe.
Would you, can
Code
we,
compliance.
does the
got
board feel
eliminated.
comfortable with
That's
changing
true,
that word?
actually.
I feel comfortable, does anyone feel
Well, it's
uncomfortable?
my motion.
I know, but now it's at the board, so it's in
And I'm
possession of
probably
the
out of
board.
order by speaking, but I get hung up
No,
on
no, I
that
understand,
terminology.
but according to the question I asked the attorney last time, now it's in possession of the board, so as long as the board is unanimous that we can make that change, we can make that change. Is anyone opposed to making that language change?
Well, I'll oppose it.
Okay,
It is-
is there a reason that you're gonna oppose?
Because code compliance is dead anyway, and I don't support the motion, but.
But I think the intent was
Yeah.
code enforcement.
Okay, fine, then make the change, I'm.
Yeah, don't play with the process here, let's get the meat going.
Okay, so, do you want to read that again then?
Yep.
Thank you.
To reduce a full-time equivalent for code enforcement to half a position and for